Alrighty, hello every folks. Are you ready to be sad? Dang right you are. Dang right you are. Let's go ahead and get this grave train rolling. Okay, so we are going to be discussing worst timelines for a ton of different characters over the course of Tactics Ogre. The fact that this story is adaptable takes many people by surprise, and that's what I want to discuss here. Let's talk about some worst outcomes for a lot of terrible people. Now, these can absolutely kind of run the gamut in terms of just how horrific some of them might wind up. Some of them deserved better, some deserved worse, some turned out absolutely smelling like roses. So that's what we're going to be going over here today. So let's go ahead and just kind of introduce the categories first and foremost here with a few notable examples for each of them. So, for example, for Somehow It Was Fine, that's going to be the generic shopkeeper. This dude absolutely makes bank. He is in no danger for pretty much the entirety of all of these different areas. Every time you see a town taken over, even if it's burnt to the ground, he seems to be up and running the absolutely next day. For example, as soon as Balmamusa ends, you can just go right back into Balmamusa and access his shop. It was somehow just fine. Anyway, from there we have his kind of compatriot here over here in the Pumpkinhead shopkeeper. Now, in his case, he basically doesn't have a whole lot of traffic to his store, so he probably wasn't making a whole lot of money. He still wasn't in a ton of danger, but he still has to live in Palace of the Dead. It kind of sucks down there, but it does have its own culture at least, and they got cool magic and whatnot. That being said, his shop is probably seeing about as much business as that one random GameStop that opened up in the very, very back corner of a mall, and you're not really sure what anybody was doing putting a shop there to begin with of any variety. I mean, we literally have this one GameStop in one of our malls nearby here. It's just like you go down a hallway, you go down another hallway, and then you turn and go down that hallway. It's like, why does this exist? They have to have signs pointing in multiple different directions to get back there. Like, this is ridiculous. But anyways, that's more or less the Pumpkinhead shop. They've got cool stuff in there, but realistically speaking, he's probably just pretty okay at best. Alright, next is a lot of people's first bad ending, and that is going to be Lord Denam. So this is a situation that can happen pretty regularly, but in his particular quote-unquote darkest timeline here, this is going to be a situation in which the Lord is the one that wound up in line to take the throne at the end of the story, and additionally, he never bothered to actually play the political game, as it were. So one of the factions hated him, and so he got blasted in the face. Now, this isn't a particular faction, and this isn't, contrary to some opinions out there, just due to one particular conversation earlier on in the game. There's actually several ways that you can prevent this outcome, even if you did fail that particular conversation. However, if you don't notice that there is a rebellion brewing in the background by reading the news, and if you don't send soldiers out to go deal with it, they are going to have a pretty high chance of pulling it off, unless you've, for example, made very neutral choices up to that point and regularly sided with all of the factions equally, which is pretty unlikely, which means that one of them more than likely will have sent some soldiers after you. And this, bear in mind, it's not just the choices that you've made, but additionally who and how you fought. So, for example, there's an entire chapter where you're mowing down Galgastani like the freaking grass, annihilating the Wallister like you've got nothing better to do, and then blowing away the Bakram just because you're bored. So, in all of those particular situations, you have a gigantic body count on your hands, but if, for example, you recruited a bunch of them, or if you happen to, let's say, just go for the objective, you're typically going to have far better relations with those people. This is why one of the only times that you actually see loyalty drops as an issue are going to be cases where people are playing with no revives, and additionally situations where people are going and doing a kill-all type of routes, because in those particular cases, people are going to be pretty pissed, and the starting loyalty for those units is going to be pretty low. Okay, next up to introduce the just war stuff category, we're going to have Mercenary or Jo. There's a ton of Mercenary commanders that are out there. In this case, this guy's just here because he's one of them that happens to be fittingly related to the one that deserved worse here. Essentially guarding the back gate of a particular castle, and just more or less doing his job until he's unceremoniously run over by your army as soon as you get there. Additionally, if he manages to survive this, he probably doesn't survive another week, because realistically, he's not exactly anything terribly threatening, but he is kind of implied to be Gildora's a friend, or at least part-time fling. Now, Gildora is the one that's going to introduce deserved worse, because in their case, sure, they also die in the course of doing their job, but they are objectively one of the worst people. They're just straight up racist and essentially writing manifestos on how an entire group of people should be genocided out of existence, and so you don't exactly have to feel bad about that time that you went and shot them about 47 times because you forgot to actually upgrade your archer's longbows. Anyway, so yeah, that's kind of about that there. Now, the next one's going to seem a little bit of a contentious pick, but it's here for the purpose of not only an optimistic reading of a particular situation, but also to up the tragedy of that particular situation. So, we are going to have Pirate Darza over here under Deserved Better. Now, for the sake of context, yes, I know I've seen the comments before over like, well, maybe it's a bit of a Stockholm syndrome type situation with Darza and Veldre, but the way that I read it from the Warren Report, the way that the two interact with each other, the way that they have that kind of long-term couple dynamic between them, even though they don't get that many lines, it's like somebody that's in a abusive relationship or something isn't too worried that his wife's going to be pissed that he died. That is long-term material, long-term marriage type of thought process right there. So to my mind, I like to think that the two of them got along pretty well. See, when it comes to Darza and Veldre, who is going to go up into Hello AO rating, in their particular situation, it kind of seems like a gender-bent version of, I think it was not Blackbeard, not Black Bart, one of those old kind of prolific pirate captains from back in the day, who basically was a navigator, essentially a noble that was a navigator or something along those lines. And the pirates that captured him lost their captain, so they were going and doing a coastal raid. They lost their captain. They're like, look, navigator guy, you're the smartest person on this ship. We need somebody to captain this thing. You lead us or we kill you. And so he ended up becoming one of the most prolific pirate captains in history. But as far as that goes, though, this feels like a gender-bent version of that. Veldre is essentially a noble woman that is captured by these pirates. Her and Darza end up getting along. They end up having a kid together, and then she ends up more or less leading their pirates. Now, that being said, the reason that they're in two different places, essentially Darza is out there doing his pirate thing. He dies over the course of doing his job, but his first concern upon being killed is thinking of Veldre there. In Veldre's case, it depends on which version we're looking at. Because in the SNES version, there is no happy, or not even remotely happy outcome for her whatsoever. Essentially, the only outcome is direct death. She mentions that she's essentially got a kid on board, and one of the first things apparently that was requested for the PSP version was to make sure to please have a peaceful outcome so you don't have to, kill the pregnant lady to save the Liberation Front. That's kind of fucked up, dude. So in her case, yes, in the SNES version, there was no avoiding it. In the PSP version, there was avoiding it, but very few people did, because this was also around the point in the game when crossbows become just immensely overpowered. And I've seen more than one video of somebody just walking in, pulling out their crossbow, immediately popping her in the face, and then the fight's done. So, yes. As far as her situation, that is absolutely horrific. The most likely outcome in Reborn, though, is that she ends up surviving, given that the conditions are that she has to be knocked down to, I believe it's 15% or lower health, after having the dialogue where she mentions her kid, at which point Denam orders everyone to stand down and just tells them to surrender. They're refusing to fight anymore. They can overpower them. Just stop. And she just accepts the surrender, and that's the end of that. They all just part ways. So she does have a good outcome, but her most horrific outcome is pretty much unavoidable death while knowing that her husband, who apparently cares about her, died. She's got a kid on board. That is fucked. Okay, and then next for horrific, we're actually going to put Vyce. Now this is going to be Hangman Vyce. There's going to be a couple of Vyces in here. Did I forget to put second Vyce in here? Hold on, we need to put second Vyce in here real quick, give me just a second here. Let's see, what was the other Vyce here? Hangman Vyce is number 7, so let's go ahead and pop Hangman Vyce in here for the sake of reference. So let's pop this sucker up here. Let's go ahead and go up one more. Where are you, Mr. Vyce? Vyce number 7, there we are, and we got Hangman Vyce. So, alright. So we've got two different versions of Vyce here. So horrific is going to be neutral Vyce. In his particular case, actually, wait, no, not neutral Vyce, Chaos Vyce, sorry. So this version of Vyce happens to be in a situation where he basically just dies screaming for help from the one person who definitely won't help him. In his particular case, he had this whole plan come together. He was spared by Tardy. He was given every opportunity to recant on being just a complete asshole, and his response was, "No, I think I'm just going to keep doing that." At which point, he ends up getting himself hanged while essentially screaming for help, which is pretty horrific. In fact, this was apparently the one scene that was given to voice actors as something to kind of aspire to in terms of understanding the mood of the game when they were doing the voice acting for Reborn, which is just kind of a fun bit of trivia. Here you go. Here's this man screaming. This is what you're in for. Now, next for Had It Coming, though, this is going to be Shanky Vyce. So for Shanky Vyce, essentially he definitely had it coming. He tried to, quote unquote, play the Game of Thrones, as it were, and he got himself stabbed multiple times. It is very dramatic. But yeah, neutral Vyce absolutely gets rocked by a bunch of stabbings. That version of him, again, directly had it coming. It's very cathartic to see him go like that. Absolutely A+ type of stuff. And then on Law, arguably, it's potentially a worse fate. You know what? Let's go ahead and let's find his Law version real quick. Here, let me see which one's the Law version here. Law Vyce is going to be Vyce 2. Yeah, they're kind of inconsistent over what's directly in what kind of slot, as it were. If you're wondering why I have them kind of mixed up here, they're just labeled as like palette 1, 2, 3, whatever. So for Law Vyce, we're just gonna go ahead and put him under deserved worse. So, okay, with Law Vyce, he technically doesn't die, but he is, like, permanently friend-zoned in the most concrete way imaginable. So he's done some pretty terrible things up to this point. He tried to be a good guy, basically got himself completely outplayed, and now is just kind of he is friend zoned so hard that he and his girlfriend the one he wants to be his girlfriend end up time traveling together, resolving their childhood traumas together, and she still says, "Yeah, that's funny," when he tries to ask her out. What a shame. Anyway, let's go ahead and move on. I like to think at that point she's seen the other versions of it. She's like, yeah, this is not worth anyone's time. Okay. Next one for deserved better is going to be the one random Templar that gets shot by Barbas. This dude was just trying to do his job. He is dude's been well trained. He just got retrained to use the most top of the line type of weapon that his empire has to offer. They invented this cool new technology that goes boom and makes stuff explode from far away. It's very impressive. And then immediately his boss is like, "Cool, can I see that?" and then shoots him in the face. So that dude deserved better. Pour one out for random Templar. He definitely deserved better. Okay. Next one for Had It Coming is going to be the Blue Rogue from Ferompa Wildwood in the PSP version. He did not exist in the other versions. He was the guy that you would steal a Reaver ring from in the PSP version. He definitely had it coming because nobody had steel ranked up that high, and also he rarely would spawn. Fuck that guy. Let's go ahead and move on. By the way, if you're wondering if you're missing anything in Reborn, Luminant Gauntlets basically just took that thing's place. Don't worry about it. Anyway, all right. Next for just war stuff, we're gonna have Man-at-Arms Goosen. So this is going to be Vyce's recruiter guy, and he more or less gets completely emasculated by Catiua and just dies. It's just war stuff. He tries to be a good recruiter. It doesn't go too well for him. All right, then we have Gatelio. Now, the reason I don't have his Reborn version here is because for these sprites, usually what I'm using is the texture pack from One Vision for the HD mod. It's just way more convenient because they're all in one place. And whenever I tried resizing them, like, they would all end up with different sizes because their hairs or helmets or whatever else would be slightly off. So when they're all universal like this, it's way more convenient. Anyway. So Gatelio, another one of those ones that's kind of a mastermind of the Wollister genocide and stuff like that. Basically just like Gildora there. In fact, they're basically best buds. And yeah, he is absolutely unrepentant in being a complete monster. All right. Next up, in terms of horrific, this is going to be bad outcome Catiua. In her particular case, she ends up not being convinced in Chapter 4 and just goes and shanks herself right as she has the opportunity to take the reins of power. She finally had the opportunity to do everything she ever wanted, And instead, all she does is experience a sudden influx in more iron in her body. So definitely not the best outcome by any means for her or anyone else. But on the plus side, somehow it was fine. We have the princess route for Catiua there, who not only, despite being a terrible person, ends up inheriting an entire country, but everyone loves her, regardless of all the weird shit she's done until then. This can happen on any route, no matter what you do. She can wind up potentially being the ruler of everything, just on account of her being there. There are very few characters throughout this series or any other that have this much absolutely free privilege in terms of getting whatever the hell they want. And she is definitely one of them. So, yeah. Anyway, let's go ahead and move on. Alright, next up is going to be, let's see, who do we got here? We got Apollinaire, pretty much just war stuff. She was just doing her job. She got herself taken out. From there, we have Dagon, who goes into horrific. Now, I like to think that his daughter wound up going and just becoming a traveling assassin or something after the end of this, but he is one of the commanders of the headhunter groups that can show up on Chaos, and in his particular case, he's essentially only gotten back into headhunting. Like, he's basically a stay-at-home dad at this point. He's retired from being a headhunter. The only reason he came back out is because his daughter got sick, and 30 grand was all he needed to save his daughter's life. Now, what's funny is that this can be even more horrific, potentially going up into AO rating territory, depending on which version of the game you're playing. See, in both PSP and Reborn, this was actually toned down a little, because essentially he's just looking for money, not exactly saying what he's going to do with it, like whether he's going to hire somebody, whether that's how much medicine he needs, who knows. But back in the original version, back in SNES, he ends up not having money there, but he has a copy of necromancy with him. His backup plan is to turn his daughter into it. Okie dokie. About 3 to 4 interruptions later, let's go ahead and continue on. Alright, next up for Had It Coming, we're going to put Festa, one of the neutral trio. I'm not going to have too many of the rando generics in here, but Festa in particular kind of deserved to be on this list right here, because in her case, she basically does nothing but give you shit the entire time that you see her, and then as soon as you save her, she's a little bit surprised by this. Now, in her darkest timeline, she basically does get taken out there. However, she comes back, sees that you saved her, and then dies anyway. Basically just getting brought back just to be proven wrong, which definitely has to sting. Which actually, now that I think about it, my man Tammuz deserved better. In their particular case, the exact same thing happens, but you know what, they have been through so dang much at that point, it's not even surprising that they came back a second time. Funnily enough, Tammuz's backstory is basically just that he's not a particularly good soldier or anything. He just keeps showing up in the worst places possible and just somehow miraculously keeps surviving. And so yeah, just to finally end up following Leonar into yet another failed fight, because every single time he was led by Leonar, only to then, get taken out, saved, and then taken out again. What an absolute shame, especially considering that he probably is pretty decently well off for that portion. His vitality is unreasonably high for whatever reason. I mean, probably because he keeps getting beaten down and coming back up. A little bit of a funny note, by the way, just kind of random trivia type of deal. If you're wondering what the deal is with the characters that, for example, Festa and Tammuz and Sarah and Voltaire, who basically have names, they're considered special as far as the game is concerned, but they've never been given unique portraits, even if a lot of the others did. The thing is, they are meant to be Leonar's generics. So from what I've heard from interviews and such, essentially Leonar is kind of more or less Matsuno's self-insert guy. So he, not directly self-insert, but he kind of viewed him as sort of like his point of view character or something like that. I forget exactly how he described it. But yeah, those were kind of the squad. They were his team. And so, oh, what the hell is this? Oops. I just hit some random button and a bunch of code bullshit showed up. Anyway, let's not hit that button again. But yeah, so that was just kind of his team of generics, his preferred generics and whatnot. Okie dokie. Next up is going to be just war stuff. That's going to be the first guy. I want to say what the hell's his name? I just had it a second ago. It's on the tip of my tongue, and now I'm blanking on it. The first commander guy that you run into when you're going down law route, and specifically in his case, he is the poetic guy. He's the brother of the first wizard that you kill at the very start of the game. And essentially, he's there trying to talk down Denam, and he kind of corrects him on his whole path going through the law route. With Denam starting off that fight, going down that actually we're going to put him under deserved better, because honestly, despite being a random generic wizard commander, in his case, legitimately law route is less appealing without him there. And I say less appealing, I mean like law route loses a lot by him not being there. As the fight starts, Denham's trying to justify everything that he's done up to that point, literally with coming up with a gem like I am the wrath of the Wallister. And by the end of it, after they talk back and forth a bit, he's basically telling him like, look dude, I am old, I've been through this shit before, this is not the way to do it. You are not who you think you are right now. Who you were like a week ago, that's who you really are here. Like you've got no business going down this particular road here. This whole vengeance for vengeance's sake thing is never going to work out. This is an endless cycle, and only you can figure out a way how to stop it for yourself and whatnot. And he more or less admits, like, yeah, I'm basically stuck in the exact same cycle. Don't be me. And by the end of it, he finally dies, and that's where Denham finally has that realization of, like, wow, I'm a piece of shit, aren't I? So that's where we have that. Now, next up, in terms of had it coming, we're once again going to have Denham on this list. See, this is going to be one of the other dark timelines for Denham, in which case he ends up going to rescue Warren, but he fails. And so that's just him kind of staring into the void as suddenly all of the empty blackness consumes all of existence because he simply couldn't leave well enough alone, and Warren died in a first turn ambush. So, yeah, that definitely sucks. Way to end the world, dumbass. Anyway, let's continue on. Alright, next is going to be Leon. Not Leon. This is the other guy. Leon's the other guy. He's the Tigers guy. This is... what's his face? I forget. But he also potentially deserved better. This is the mercenary guy that is working with necromancers up north, and essentially his job was just to be a bodyguard for said necromancers. And after all is said and done, he considers his job done. He's about to get paid, and that's when you show up, and suddenly they're going and raising all the zombies back from, or all of the dragons back from the dead, in order to go serve as his army. And throughout all of it, he's like, yeah, look, I'm just going to do my best, but this is pretty unrealistic right now. And his final words are just, don't turn me into anything unnatural. So that's pretty grim, man. That sucks. Alright, next up for just war stuff, we're gonna have Mercure over there defending. What the hell was it? I think he's one of the Heim defenders. But he's the one that comes down from the wall, going all crazy Jedi mode with a sword and everything. Realistically, though, it's just war stuff. He's been a bit of a comical goofball since the very beginning, being a bit of a nothing burger fight back on SNES, being one of the dumbest bosses ever in PSP, and kind of bringing it back a bit for Reborn, where at least he doesn't go like full Leroy Jenkins as soon as the fight starts. So at least there's that. But still, he's just kind of okay. It's just war stuff. Okay, next up, in terms of, let's see, who do we want to put here? Deserved worse? Oz. I mean, he just dies normally in every potential outcome. For all of the crap that he does to people, just like all the random torture and whatever else, dude definitely deserved worse. Same thing for Balabatos. He is just normally executed and or shanked in the gut, and or hanged or whatever else. And hell, even when he has his hanging, he has his big dramatic speech over how somebody else is going to become just as bad as he was. Yeah, okay then, buddy. I'm sure everybody's just as genocidal as you are. So either way, that sucks. Next up for, let's see. This actually... I'm surprised this doesn't get it a higher rating. And that's actually a Briam side quest there. He's again one of those weird quiet things in the background, where in his case, his faction has a weird leadership dynamic where they want to change sides. And the leadership wants to change sides, but they can't change sides without there being an issue. So essentially, his son ends up dying for the purpose of putting him back in charge, at which point he ends up going and throwing himself off the ramparts in order to put whoever happens to be owning the castle back in charge, which is basically you. So he wants to eliminate the leadership structure there to legally give his people a means to go and switch sides, give or take, and or force anybody else who's there to switch sides just by means of being there. So yeah, that's kind of messed up. We got effectively like him ordering his son to die and then throwing himself off a cliff. Like, yeesh. That is horrific as hell. All right, next up on just war stuff. Abda and Berta. So they're going to be one icon. And you might be saying, wait a minute, but I recruited Abda and Berta. What do you mean they have a darkest timeline? you didn't recruit Obda and Berta. You recruited Obda and Berta the Younger. The originals just died at some point, and we don't know how. They just sort of come back. So it's probably just war stuff. We don't know for sure. Okay, next up for horrific, we've got Hamilton. Yeah, stuff doesn't really go terribly well for him. So in the primary canonical route here, he technically survives, but boy oh boy does he wish he didn't. So he's effectively captured while trying to save Claire, who ends up being his babysitter later. Ends up being tortured to the point that his wife's music box causes him to go into violent fits. And in general, just stuff doesn't really tend to work out in his favor too much. Funny note on this, he actually more than likely is not put into this state by, technically this state that we're seeing here, Tardy totally puts him into that state, but in terms of his other vegetative state, that is more than likely Balzaphon, who's actually going to go up into deserved worse. So as far as that relationship goes, when we last see Tardy and Hamilton talking, he more or less orders him to be let go because their castle is about to be taken over. They have a argument over different philosophies and whatnot, with Tardy essentially saying that somebody has to be in control, or else everything's just going to go completely haywire. Hamilton is giving his whole speech over everyone should be able to do whatever they want. Realistically speaking, the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. But between both of them, there's still kind of that mutual respect there. Like, you get the sense that Tardy wanted to torture the guy, but still let him go, because he is still sort of valuable to them. In terms of the whole being tortured into a vegetable thing, though, that's something that Balzaphon is known to do, and in fact, it's going to relate to the next one on this list. See, Balzaphon is effectively the Revolver Ocelot of this universe here, so every time that he has an opportunity to go torture and mess with somebody, he does, and for whatever reason, he happens to have a bunch of poisons with him at apparently any given time in order to turn people into horrific vegetable things. So next up on the list is technically next two on the... Alrighty, so, several interruptions later, I think it's time to start trying to rapid-fire this thing a little bit more. Okie dokie, next up is going to be under Pretty Okay. We're going to have the first Divine Knight that you run into. They've been sitting pretty, going and, living up their whole heaven life, only for some random schmuck to come down from the world below and shank the bejesus out of them for reasons that they don't understand because they felt slightly insulted. Honestly, that still seems pretty okay given their whole situation, considering that they probably just respawned a few feet away. At least I like to think that's how it works. I honestly have absolutely no idea. Anyway, let's see. Next up for Deserved Better. Oh man. The man, the legend, Azelston. He dies of mysterious plot disease. It's a bit of a shame. He's one of the coolest characters in the game, and he just basically dies at the end of the thing because they couldn't leave him around for canonical reasons. The sheer level of badass would simply be too much. All right, let's see. Next for a potentially horrific, we've got Sherry. So in her darkest timeline, she actually isn't saved or recruited or anything else. She ends up taking her loss over on the mountain, and then she ends up being homeless, living in the burnt-out remains of Balmamusa forever, wondering when she's going to get her revenge. She never does. She just kind of presumably wanders around there for ages and then just gets randomly ambushed and presumably killed at some point because she just sort of disappears after a little while. So that sucks. Also, I'm not entirely sure why we have her on here twice, but either way, I guess her alternate outcome is just as horrific because she probably becomes a shaman. She ends up becoming a member of the team there. She ends up hearing the rumors that shamans are pretty good in Reborn, you guys, and then ends up getting eaten by a griffin. So that's always a bit of a fun thing, ain't it? All right, next up on horrific, probably going to the current top of the pile, is going to be Queen Bernada. Now, in her case, she comes off as icy and cold-hearted and whatever else. Also, hilariously enough, she looks more like a lot more like Catiua than her actual mom. But that being said, despite her being that way, honestly, Dorgalua was a complete dick to her up to this point. He's basically been running around with concubines. He's been screwing around on the side, left, right, and center. Basically, just spent all his time in his opulent pimp palace, and well, then their kid dies because he needed to build this stupid party palace in the sky. Their son ends up walking off of it because he decided to go let them play there one day, and she, depressed over everything that's going on, throws herself off immediately after. I mean, that is horrific, and yeah, that's that is freaking rough, dude. And in fact, actually, that's probably also going up into, Hello AO rating. Now, I said earlier that the two previous ones would be related to Balzaphon, and then I lied. So let's go ahead and fix that real quick. So, first of all, also for AO rating, we're going to have... actually, we're going to put him into Horrific. So for Horrific, we've got a Boona Prancet. So in his case, he's, again, given some of Balzaphon's poisons. He's all completely messed up. Even God can't save him now. And so he's just falling apart from the inside due to the kind of truth serum kind of stuff that they gave him. So he's just dying and falling apart and whatever else. Horrific way to go. Dies coughing up blood and whatever else after being chucked into basically a sewer. So that is pretty darn shitty, but above that, and so far I would say probably the current top of Hello AO rating, is Ozma's Darkest Timeline. But wait a minute, you just fight her as a boss. She's going and, dying maybe in Coda 4, or maybe dying during the main story. Oh, no, buddy. She has a way darker timeline that nobody ever plays. So her Darkest Timeline, in fact, involves specifically not recruiting her after meeting the conditions to recruit her. See, in PSP, like back in SNES, you couldn't recruit her. There was the kind of subplot of Hobram being her husband, but we didn't. We didn't have the subplot of her joining the Resistance. Now, the thing about this is in PSP they added it, but they also added the worst possible outcome for her. See, when she goes on her kind of tirade there over how she doesn't trust the Dark Knights anymore and all that kind of thing, it's Volak that's there serving as her serving as her commander there. And honestly, he deserved better. Like that dude is just going straight into deserve better. He seems to be legitimately trying to just do his job, despite being in a fairly corrupt system. He always struck me as the sort of like, old-timey police captain just doing their best kind of sort. But in either way, he lets her go. Like, once he sees that she's going and potentially turning traitor, he's like, look, just go sort yourself out. Like, there's nothing I can do to fix this. I don't know how true any of this is. Like, your job is to be with the Knight Commanders here, but, like, if you need to go sort your shit out, go do it. And so she does, and so she ends up going and getting captured by the Resistance there, and then we have the potential outcome. See, if she's had that falling out with him, that they know that there's potential that she's going and switching sides, but Hobram refuses to let her know who he is. Like, if he refuses to admit that he's her husband, she will then go back to the Dark Knights, confused, pissed off, and whatever else. And that's the thing, you don't see her for the rest of the story until in the epilogue she shows up in a wheelchair, unspeaking, being driven by Balzaphon. Yeah. So that's a thing. So that's going into the top of Hello Adults Only rating for sure. All right, let's see. Next up for Pretty Okay, we're going to put Claire. She does get attacked during the Archaeopteryx Rhyme bit, but Hamilton does save her. She does end up in a pretty okay spot. Same thing for Donalto, that realistically most of his endings are pretty solid, even though, who knows how flexible he really was on a lot of those morals or whatever else. Allegedly, he's just doing it for the kids. But granted, that particular sentiment has gone really dark since this game came out. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that, they're doing the good version of that, okay? We're not going to go down that particular rabbit hole. And before anyone says that's overblown, hell no, it's not. The guy that ran my Catholic school growing up got arrested for the exact same thing. So, yeah, no, all those hugs turned out to be way more awkward in retrospect. Anyway, let's go ahead and get back to it then. All right, so next up for honestly, probably deserved worse. Yunin, his whole side quest is him going and trying to atone for the fact that he committed a bunch of atrocities for Galgastan. The thing is, though, in his darkest timeline, he winds up potentially not joining the Resistance at all. He never gets a chance to atone for what he did. He never gets a chance to go meet Oshon or whoever else. And realistically, he probably just ends up getting executed once the castle's fully integrated, At least that's what I would guess would happen. Okay, somehow for Archerius Maruvra, everything wound up just fine. No matter what, he's never even in danger. So he's just fine over there. Alright, let's see. Next up for Nybeth, honestly, stuff winds up pretty okay for him. Like, he winds up as an immortal lich, but that's what he wanted. He wanted to be some weird undead abomination. Like, it's the old Skeletor meme of, like, joke's on you, I'm into that shit. So, to me, that's him through and through. So yeah, things wind up pretty okay for him. Even when he ends up dying at the end of his particular side quest, there, he seems perfectly okay with it. He's like, "Yeah, sweet, I get to finally experience this death thing I've been so crazy about." All right, let's see. Next up for Hello, or actually no, just for general horrific. We're just gonna say most of Sistina's outcomes because she probably just there's implications there, but the thing is, I don't think that there's potentially as bad implications as what happens to her sister. See, in Saria's case, she either dies at the very start there, at when you're going to save her for the first time. If it's the PSP version, she probably died there. If it's the SNES version, she definitely died there. If it's Reborn, she probably survived and might have died in one of the other routes. Now, in her case, though, if all of her friends die, like especially if Bayan gets sniped and you don't find out her location, she is just held by pirates and presumably sold off as labor or something. We don't actually ever hear from her ever again. So presumably she's sold off as labor or something. I don't assume certain horrible things that would definitely get this thing demonetized necessarily happen in that case, considering that it's Veldry that's running her imprisonment. I would assume that there's probably more rules against that sort of thing in their spot, but you know, like they're not run by Oz. So either way, we never hear from them again, but also we just kind of assume she just winds up in a ditch somewhere or something. We don't like it's horrific one way or the other. She's basically going from capture to permanent imprisonment, and yeah, it's definitely not a good outcome by any means. But scarier things happen to some of the others. So yeah, still horrific though. So she winds up there in that case. If you end up going on any other route, she's just never heard from again. She is presumably killed off in one of the random battles in the background, and that's just kind of the end of that. All right, so next up we actually have the two versions of Leonar. We're gonna have a neutral Leonar that gets shanked in the throat, and then we have we have Conspiracy Leonar. So Conspiracy Leonar is the one that decides to go full 1v1 me bro on you, and he essentially tries to get you killed because one of y'all needs to be a leader, and the other one can't survive with the other one still existing. So I would say that's probably just war stuff in his case, considering that it is basically a straight up chess move. It is like it sucks, it's a shitty thing to do, but it is a fully pragmatic move from start to finish. So I would say he goes over there. However, his neutral variant, I would say probably deserved better. He had his whole redemption arc. Everything was looking all nice and rosy and peachy for him. He was finally going to essentially go alongside Denam there to roll the Wallister, to roll the island. Everything was going great, and then Catiua was like, yeah, no. And, yeah, no, dead. So that was kind of about that there. Let's see. Next up, probably for Ronway, he definitely deserved worse. I mean, he basically just gets casually shanked. He does die screaming for mercy in the neutral route, and that one is extremely cathartic. But yeah, no. I mean, hell, everything about neutral. I love that scene in neutral. It is all of neutral, regardless of whatever you think about it. All of neutral is like hinging on that one scene of essentially Vyce outplaying everybody and popping in to get absolutely giga shanked after killing Ronway there. Like that scene is just mwah, just one of my favorite. It is such a beautiful everything falling down like total House of Cards moment. It's beautiful. Everybody's ambitions are reached. Everybody's ambitions are squashed immediately. It's awesome. Anyway, so yeah, definitely deserved worse in that case. Actually, it probably goes into had it coming. Like he definitely deserved worse. He just had so many bad plays up to that point. He's like he's that guy that gets lucky a couple of times and then just ignores every bad decision going forward. So there's that there. Next we got Branton, who probably goes into had it coming. He's a greedy douche, but frankly, he kind of knew when to pull back at certain points to avoid needless casualty. I would say he ultimately still ends up being a better leader than Ronway. Total dick, but still, like, there's at least some pragmatism there. They still had it coming, but I wouldn't necessarily say they necessarily deserved worse. He probably is the guy that killed off Dorgy, but that being said, Dorgy totally deserved it. Who are we kidding? Actually, hold on. I need to make a quick change to this list. Yeah, there we go. Somehow I managed to miss Dorgalua. How did that happen? Like, they're pretty much the epitome of that meme that's been floating around lately of, like, all the plot relevance, no screen time. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty horrific in his case. He was trying to go get his wife back after realizing how bad he fucked up, and then he ends up just getting locked in a hell prison forever, at which point somebody takes over and dismantles his entire kingdom that he built up. He can't even go he can't even cross over to get to the other side to presumably go meet up with his wife and kids. He's just stuck in permanent like death limbo, and yeah, that's messed up. However, for deserved worse, we've got Rowdy Roddy, who wound up winding up in a very similar situation. However, in his case, he did more than just be a bad husband. In his particular case, he kind of nuked several cities as well as his own people, and blew a city into the sky permanently. Like, he's probably the worst person in the series. So definitely deserved worse on that one. It's weird because it's so comically over the top how much crap he did, that it doesn't even get the AO rating, because it's just he's gone to full like Saturday morning cartoon villain by the end of it. He's just like decimating entire cities, um, and I guess now they're all angels. So it's weird how that suddenly falls off the AO rating. Anyway, all right. Next up for what do we want to do here for Josephine? I forget which one's which. So she is the kind of solo Sybil there, the one that's fighting on the Galgastani side. She's just kind of doing her job, trying to keep you at bay in multiple situations. Ends up running away, ends up coming back to try to confront you in the ending. It goes about as well as it usually does, yeah, she's just kind of doing her job. Like, she does have her own stuff for being there, but realistically she's just kind of trying to be a good soldier there. So I would say just goes into just war stuff. Next up into potentially deserved better, surprising considering that I might have these two sprites mixed up. Let's go move them here because she's got the Galgastani colors. So in her case, though, the reason that I'm saying that they deserve better, this would be Gatalio's doctor, more or less. And yeah, they are on the Galgastani side, and they've been doing atrocities left, right, and center, but in her case, she seems to just be trying to do her best job of being a doctor, and essentially feels compelled to go do a last stand, especially in the PSP version, using completely useless weapons. For some reason, they were the only fight in which they were, well, actually one of a couple fights in PSP, where they were supplied with shot grenades. Now, for those that have played Reborn, yeah, those shot grenades are amazing. In PSP, though, they were functionally worthless and basically did no damage, and it's bizarre how that ever got past testing. And I don't mean like, oh, there's maybe some situations they do damage. I mean, they are straight up bugged, and they are non-fatal to the point that they cannot do actual fatal damage for whatever reason. There's some rounding error or something that means that they can't ever kill anything. It's the strangest thing with those weapons. Anyway, for some reason they're exclusively equipping those, with exception of a couple archers that they had. But she is just there throwing herself out as a sacrifice to go buy time for Catalio, who is a complete monster. But still her boss, she's just trying to do her job. I would argue that that's one of those cases of, yeah, they were on the worst side of things, but they probably deserved better than they got. Because that was a pitiful fight in PSP. So let's go ahead and continue on. All right, so for Ravnus, look, this is going to be contentious. I'm going to say had it coming in pretty much every route that she goes on. She almost goes out of her way to try to get herself killed, and I'm not entirely sure why. So let's go ahead and break down her potential worst outcomes. So she ends up, let's say, getting the wrong end of the stick at Balmamusa. That's one way she can go. Now, that is arguably one of the more mild ways that things play out, and that sucks. In that particular case, she would probably just go into deserved better, right? So that version of her would go into deserved better. Because Vyce just basically turns around and shoots her, and that's it. She doesn't die there. She just slowly dies, giving her last words to Denam in a off-screen scene that you can actually go find in the Warren report, and then just peacefully passes away. So it's not a particularly horrific way to go. Now, that said, though, if we're talking about the various ways she dies during the fights, she seems to almost go out of her way to get herself killed off. Like, she directly decides, hey, there's two armies fighting each other. They're both my enemy. Wait, how the hell did I survive that? So that version of her would go under had it coming. If it's the version of her that kind of dies in prison there, that kind of winds up in the category of just war stuff. Because in that particular case, it's mostly because every side hates her. She refuses to side with one side or the other, so she kind of winds up getting smuggled back and forth as a captor, and nobody really wants her. The only way she survives anything is by joining Denam's team, and that is extremely unlikely to happen. So 3 of the 5 ways that she ends up dying in the background are all going to be moments where you just forgot to go check up on her on the news, and she randomly died off screen. So basically, while it's arguable that during the fight she had it coming, and while it's arguable she deserved better if you're going down the chaos route, when it comes to the law route, frankly, the fact that she gets forgotten in a prison somewhere feels like just war stuff, and that sucks, but it's, that happened a seemingly distressing amount of times, a lot of the time anyway. Actually, deserved worse is probably going for Zapen. So it depends on which route he goes. In Law, he probably just retires. On Chaos, though, he tries to get some last-minute Nookie from Catiua there, and Vyce kills him for it. So, definitely deserved worse on that one. Alright, Cressida probably deserved better, though it's questionable. So, okay, so Cressida is a necromancer. They're one of the apprentices that wants to turn on Nibeth and all that. And it's funny because even though it's pronounced Nibeth officially now, like we have a proper pronunciation for it, I still want to call him Nibeth. Anyway, so yeah, her kind of darkest timeline there is that she sees her entire family killed off for the Galgastani cause there, and just basically does a last stand trying to buy everybody some time while hating them the entire course of the way. So I would say they probably deserved better in that particular instance. Also, quick interruption here because it sounds like the puppy needs to go out. I'll be right back. Okay, so next up for horrific, we're actually going to have Oelia. So Oelia is a weird case where they kind of had it coming, considering the dumb plan that they decided to enact there, where she tried to go on a solo mission to take out the hordes of undead that her brother was leading, and in her particular case, she tries to use a warp gem to get out of there, and ends up getting stabbed multiple times by skeletons. She escapes, give or take. You basically revive her, she escapes at that point, and then you find her later bleeding out, because she apparently didn't take the time to go heal herself. So, yeah, kind of an interesting outcome, kind of horrific if you think about it, that they just sort of escaped and then just sort of landed in a random house and just had their guts spilling out everywhere, so that's kind of fucked. Anyway, let's go ahead and move on. Alright, so next for probably also horrific, Oshone probably got captured and turned into a zombie. Considering that when you get her, she is surrounded by zombies, they've turned everybody else into zombies, and they have a little bit of vendetta. So, I'm surprised that there is no alternate timeline where she turns up as a zombie. Seems like something that would happen. Okay, then we have, for deserved worse, we've got Rodlam. This guy's from March of the Black Queen. He's essentially a hidden boss that's just really incompetent at his job, trying to make a army of dragons to go take over the world. He fails at every single possible opportunity, and in his particular case, his outcome here is basically that he just just kind of reincarnates into Palace of the Dead, immediately gets surrounded by zombies and eaten alive, and frankly, he still somehow deserved worse. So, we'll just go ahead and leave that there. Actually, we'll probably put it under had it coming. Like, every time that he did that, he had it coming. Okay, next up for Yuria. By her own words, pretty okay. So her darkest timeline is that nobody does Coda 1. So she ends up getting possessed by Serene forever. Now, the thing about this is Serene is basically, a friggin' mythical creature that's keeping her alive. She basically saved her from pirates that she probably sent in there to the first place. But either way, she essentially ends up being possessed forever. She doesn't seem to have a problem with this. In fact, she kind of seems to have a thing for the demon that possessed her. So, I guess that's kind of pretty okay by their own metric. Sure, why not? Then we'll have Tristan, who honestly he doesn't have a bad ending here whatsoever. He basically gets away with everything that he does, including up to including potentially killing off the protagonist of March of the Black Queen. Okay, then we have Gamp. Everything winds up pretty okay for him regardless. Like, he just seems to get lucky all the dang time. See more interruptions later, like an hour later. Let's go ahead and finally wrap this up. Okie doke. For Deserved Better, good old Hector trying to save his people and whatever else pretty much winds up in a terrible spot no matter what he does. Whether he ends up being dead and zombified, whether he ends up getting executed by you, or whether he winds up just kind of getting unceremoniously killed off during one of the other fights. He either dies trying to avenge his wife, dies trying to save his people there, or again, dies trying to save a smaller group of his same people. Either way, he's always pretty consistent in that same goal. All right, next up for horrific, we've got Manaflora, who gets to go up here right next to Bernada. In her particular case, she basically ends up getting presumably, well, unwillingly, you know, given a kiddo by the king, and essentially ends up getting fired from her job for it. Suddenly goes from being royalty to being homeless, and then dies in childbirth. So yeah, very horrific situation there. Basically, everybody that was involved with Catiua in any way winds up in a terrible spot. Abuna Prancet ends up dead. Manaflora ends up dead. More or less, her parents, give or take. It was kind of the foster dad, more or less. The queen there ends up going and taking her life shortly after due to other reasons. Like, it is just not a happy situation involving that lady whatsoever. Anyway, so yeah, stuff just goes from iffy to horrific pretty darn quick in her case. All right, next up for let's see. For probably had it coming, I'm gonna put Lyndall here. I'm willing to bet he totally knew what happened to the stuff on the ship. And I'm going to assume that he probably hid it somewhere because the way that he acts throughout the entire thing, it seems like he totally knew what the hell was going on with the cargo in the ship. He just ended up switching sides. So if he ended up getting himself killed for it, honestly, it kind of seemed to me like he put himself in that situation. Same thing for Folkert. Just he's constantly nipping at Sistina's heels there. So I would say that he pretty much had it coming with his whole plan there of being a rebel, rebelling against the rebellion, and then just kind of being surprised when, oh no, this means I have no friends. So I would say, yeah, he probably had it coming in his particular case. Also, considering that they had a sneaky person that got captured, they had an old guy that might fit in better. They're like, yes, dude in armor, clearly the guy that should be sneaking around scouting. Anyway, so yeah, kind of did that to himself. Next for probably deserved better, Bayan. He was just trying to lead them all in a better direction, and more often than not, he ends up killed trying to save Sistina. So yeah, deserved better in his case. Divold, I mean, his situation's pretty horrific one way or another. He's already dead when you end up recruiting him. He's effectively just the soul of another guy trapped in the dead body of another guy. So, not really a great situation one way or another. In the case of the neutral route, he ends up having just enough humanity on account of being with his sister to survive to the end of the war and potentially just kind of live out his days until he goes feral in the woods. Whereas, for example, on the other routes, he either ends up being a complete failure, doesn't come into being at all, or potentially the worst outcome, he goes hollow and is sent by Nibeth to attack Almorica and ends up getting his sister killed in the process. I would say that's probably his worst outcome there, just being turned into this weird undead husk monster. All right. Actually, same thing for Gildas, who winds up in pretty much the same situation. Funnily enough, the main difference between neutral and the other routes is whether or not he dies to the poison there. He ends up getting saved in the other routes. He ends up on the ground one way or the other. But in neutral, Nibeth is just kind of distracted, happens to be strolling by, and goes and picks him up before somebody can revive him. In the other routes, he is presumably saved by the other White Knights. Murden, surprisingly, I don't know why I have Gildas in here twice. Murden is somehow pretty much fine in every situation, so he gets to go there, and I would say same thing for Deneb. She seems to always wind up smelling like roses and reincarnating if she dies anyway. So either way, somehow everything's always fine for them. Same thing for Canopus. He doesn't really have a kind of direct bout outcome outside of dying in a fight, so he does, he's going to go into pretty okay. He potentially loses a lot of friends along the way. Realistically, for most campaigns, he ends up surviving through to the end. I would say the odds are pretty good that he's probably turning out just fine. Same thing for Olivia. Canonically, Matsuno himself said that they're, boinking on the boat, so she canonically makes it out of there, and, has the usual, more stereotypical good ending there. For Warren, that's a weird one. This is a super weird one. I'm gonna say, do we put him under deserved worse? Okay, it's a meme at this point. We gotta. Okay, here's the thing. Warren, Warren winds up fine in most situations, but this is related to this one where Denam had it coming. See, actually, we're probably gonna put the two right next to each other in had it coming. The thing is, his plan for saving everybody else is to trap himself in hell, and then he's got some convoluted magical bullshit plan to MacGyver his way out of hell, and he's totally going to do it. He's just been in here a couple hours, you guys. It's fine, he says to you, discovering him months later. So he's convinced that he's going to get just kind of like Doctor Strange's way out of there. And in the process of getting out of there, if he gets himself killed during his recruitment fight, the world basically ends. So either way, his crackpot plan more or less almost ends the world in a best case scenario, or totally does in a worst case scenario. So yeah, going under had it coming for that one. All right. Probably one of the most horrific ones, though, is going to go for Saria up here, going into hello AO rating. So in her particular case, it depends on which one you're playing through. If you're going and recruiting her, you kind of get pieces of the story through the different routes. This is probably why the game didn't get an AO rating. But for example, on one route, like on neutral, she ends up running away from you multiple times, convinced that you did the things that you're rumored to have done, and she refuses to join you. So while you save her, she does still escape. However, you do see, for example, under the different versions, where she ends up either bound or charmed during the fight to potentially save her. Additionally, then on the other routes, we see something similar with that fight there, or we don't see her at all. So on Law Route, we do not see what happens to her whatsoever. The raid on her location still happens. In Neutral, you arrive in time to save her. In Chaos, you end up running into her at a different time there. But specifically on Law, you are not there to help deal with that situation as it comes. Now, the reason that this is important is, again, like in Chaos, you wind up with a situation that you still have a conversation with them after. In Neutral, you wind up with them running away. But in Chaos, or not Chaos, but in Law, and please bear in mind, if I'm getting some details wrong, I apologize. It's the end of a long video. I'm hoping you get the general gist of what I'm trying to get across here. But we've seen cases where we know the Dark Knights are attacking. We know Oz is the one leading the attack. We know he's known for torturing people. We know that he orders all of his soldiers to, have their fun, so to speak, while either binding her to the ground or putting a mind control spell on her. And either way, apparently he's just super into watching this situation. Now, if you're not there to stop it, what do you think is happening? Yeah, so there's that. Anyway, okay, so that sucks. So next up, for probably just war stuff, basically anytime that Aircell's hot-headedness gets her killed, no real shocker there. Now, you might think that Tardy would go down into somehow it was fine, but I would say in his particular case, he probably winds up in probably... It's weird. Depending on who you ask, deserved better or deserved worse. Now, here's why it's potentially both. Yes, he's done messed up things up to this point, but at the same time, those messed up things were for the purpose of ending a war. Now, before you're saying, oh no, atrocities are something that people would never do to achieve a better outcome, remember how how a lot of the birth of civilization was kind of credited to the Romans and the stuff that they did for empire building and building up civilization and whatever else? Do you know how many times they went in and wholesale annihilated entire civilizations for just being awkwardly in their way? Like if they refused to assimilate or something? For all intents and purposes, if you're a Star Trek fan at all, they were the medieval Borg. Like you either got on board and joined along and everything was all great if you were part of the group, your religion got thrown into the blender and added to theirs, or you just got crushed under their foot. And that's more or less what Lotus is kind of built around. So as far as wholesale annihilation of different locations, he's definitely a lot more on the, I would say, he's a lot more modern in terms of his takes on things. Like, for example, with the Valerian Isles there, he's ordered by the person to that he's supposed to be helping to take over the islands, but refuses, essentially stopping barely outside of their normal borders in order to set up a defensible choke point and convincing everyone to stand the hell down. So he basically stopped the island from being taken over to begin with. From there, the whole raid on Goliath is for the purpose of getting Catiua, putting her on the throne, and just ending the fight before it ever starts. So I would argue in that particular case, considering that that was their goal at the time, that effectively they're sacrificing this village to avoid, generations of war, that seems like a pretty worthwhile thing as far as they're concerned. Now, the way they go about it sucks, but that's more so, I would argue, Balzafon's fault. Now, one more little bit to consider. I mentioned this a few videos ago, but as far as like why didn't he stop that particular situation from happening, there's further context here because remember this is like a week after he ended up getting injured trying to take the Brynhilder as a backup plan, and at that point he ended up getting near killed and lost an eye. So for all intents and purposes, this guy might have just been on heavy sedatives at the time. So that's kind of my headcanon on the whole thing. That he's just been on drugs this entire time. We end up seeing a more regrettable version of him later, or regretful version of him later. So I would argue they probably maybe deserve better there. Okay. Then we have probably just war stuff in the case of everybody to do with Cressida, because frankly, all of them just die doing what they intended to. For Martim, he definitely deserved worse. He's a sadistic asshole. For Barbas, he probably deserved worse for just being a complete bonehead, frankly. For Hobrim, I would say it's probably... Okay. For the stuff that happens to him, he totally had it coming. He's going on a one-man revenge quest. He did that to himself. For Andorras, same thing. There's several moments that he probably could have been a lot more secretive in terms of switching sides or something and not gotten himself killed. Because frankly, even if he does get himself killed, how is that supposed to save the people he's saying he's sacrificing himself for anyway? Totally not going to work. Also for Vipal, getting yourself eaten by a dragon, totally had it coming. Like, how else was that going to play out? 100% the epitome of had it coming. Okay, anyway, that's all I have time for. And yeah, I gotta get going, so y'all have yourselves a good one. I hope this was entertaining, and let me know where you might have put any of these people. Okay, take care. Bye.